You might have noticed that behind me the scene is quite bare. The walls are no longer covered in twinkling lights and tinsel. And the reason for this is that we have passed the Epiphany, the 6th day of January, 12 days after the start of the great Christmas feast, and for, at least a couple of centuries, really since we all started to decorate our homes for Christmas, the theory has gone that you take down your Christmas decorations on the 6th of January, on the Epiphany. And I've never really questioned that before. I've always just assumed, well, Christmas is sort of more or less over, isn't it? The new year has gone, has come, and it's time to get on with life. But Christmas isn't over, and even a lot of Christians seem to misunderstand Epiphany Tide in that respect. Epiphany Tide is what is known as the time after Christmas until Candelmass, which is the 2nd of February. And it's generally thought of as a distinct and different festival, which is a complete fallacy, really. In fact, the great feasts of Christmas and Easter are a certain number of days long. I think is it 60 days? It's something like that. I can't remember how many days it is, but they are a specific length of time. Or maybe it's 40 days, maybe 60 days is too long, or maybe Easter's 60 days and Christmas is 40. I can't remember, but they are, liturgically speaking, the same season. Epiphany, we call the latter half of Christmas tide Epiphany Tide, and I think maybe there's this accidental thought that Christmas runs from Christmas Day to Epiphany, and then Epiphany Tide runs from Epiphany to Candelmass, and it does, but because Epiphany Tide is part of Christmas Tide, it's part of the Great Christmas Feast, liturgically speaking, Christmas is not over until the Feast of Candelmass. And I was talking to somebody online about how it's always sad, and I've spoken to people in my family who agree. It's a sad time is the 6th of January, because we take our stuff down, and it's a little bit like, well, now we return to sort of life as normal. And in two ways that's wrong. Firstly, the darkness has not gone from this part of the year yet. It's still extremely dark, and I get around this by having my mood centre, which is a sort of set of candles that I sort of burn on a night, and they are not part of my grotto. They are something that I do between the two equinoxes, when it's, well, for the winter side, when it's dark, because it's still dark. We're still in need of some sort of nice light pick-me-up, and indeed, where I'm based in Harrogate, the little lights on the stray trees, they stay on. They stay on between when we don't use daylight savings. Those lights are always on. So there's that. The other thing is that the incarnation as a happening changed everything. There was no going back to normal after the birth of Christ. There was no going back to the days before the Messiah was incarnated. There was no return to, the world was forever changed by that, one night in Bethlehem. And so it's interesting, because when I speak to a lot of my friends, they are like, well, sometimes we leave our decorations up for much longer. And thinking about it, there is no good reason that I have seen, and I have researched this a little bit, because I have to admit that I didn't know very much about this, I have researched it a little bit, and there is no good reason why one cannot leave their decorations up from the start of Advent, the hanging of the greens, to Candelmass. And the hanging of the greens is a traditional ceremony, believe it or not, of sort of, I suppose, older Christians, sort of further back in history, and they did used to decorate their churches for the festival season, and it started with the ceremony of hanging of the greens, which presumably was when they decked the halls, so to speak. And Candlemas is an appropriate place to finish. So why do some people take their stuff down on the 6th? Well, the only connection I have found is with Yuletide. Yuletide is the pagan festival that takes place around the winter solstice. And the idea is that you burn a log, a Yule log. No, it's not the type that you get from the supermarket that's in the freezer section. It's full of chocolate and you eat it. That is not a Yule log. A real Yule log is a big log that you can burn on your hearth, and you sort of burn it across the winter solstice. And you're supposed to keep the ashes. You're not, because usually you would, you'd have a wooden fire back in the day when they were all pagans, and they would burn their Yule log, and then they would keep the ashes, rather than sort of scatter them or throw them away or whatever, because that was supposed to sort of bring good luck or something like that. And indeed, the general feeling is that to leave your decorations up past the Epiphany is to invite bad luck into the house, is to sort of, it's a very, very paganistic type sort of, thing. Don't leave your Christmas decorations up or something bad will happen to you. And it's a load of poppycock, but I think that sort of mentality has got into tradition, and it's just tradition now. Now we just take it down on the 6th because we always have done, because hundreds of thousands of years ago the pagans were a bit worried about anything that was going on past the 12th day of Christmas, which they didn't celebrate, but that sort of point in time after Yule. So yeah, I would say that I'm afraid I'm a sort of customs and tradition person, really. I like the idea that you have it up for a certain length of time. I do. So it won't affect me. I shall always take my Christmas grotto down on the 6th of January. However, for those that decide otherwise to leave theirs up, liturgically you have a good defence until Candlemas. If you still have your decorations up on the 3rd of February, then I'm sorry, but that is a bit weird, and there is no defending that. But up until the 2nd of February, I think, liturgically speaking, you're well within your rights to do that. So there we are. That is my sort of Epiphany broadcast for this year. It's slightly off the theme, but also still sort of Christmassy Epiphany-like. I mean, this tradition of decorating something around this time of year. The pagans that I was speaking to you about before that, burnt the log. They also had a thing about trees around this time of the year, and they would also decorate trees around this part of the year. They did that a very long time ago, because as somebody pointed out to me across this winter, in fact, a Muslim, in fact, but there we are, knows his Bible, what can I say, pointed out to me chapter and verse where it mentions the use of decorated trees by pagans, and how it's sort of frowned upon by the early Jews. It's not really to be done. I don't have a Christmas tree, I must admit. I cannot afford one, they are very expensive, so I have a plastic sort of imitation, which I don't know if that's sort of worse or better really, but it's interesting to note that this is, it's another one of those situations where, there's still a bit of paganism involved in all of this. So don't be too worried about the taking everything down exactly on time. But if they're still up after Candlemas, there is something wrong with you.